Over the past 2 years, we have taken a bare patch of land and turned it into a fully fenced-in garden with 12 raised beds and a beautiful orchard filled with dwarf fruit trees.
A lot of people have asked, how much did that cost?
Hi, I'm Hillary.
And I'm Peter, and in this video, we are gonna break down exactly how much it has cost us to go from nothing to a beautiful garden.
So we moved to this house in the summer of 2022 and knew right away that we wanted a big, bountiful garden.
Yeah, we had a lot of experience gardening. Previously, we had a really nice garden on a small 1/3 acre lot. It gave us a lot of experience, but now that we're in our forever house, we knew we just wanted something more grand.
And since it is our forever house, we knew that spending the money to build this garden would be more reasonable because we aren't packing up and moving in a few years.
So before we start, I think we should describe the garden a bit. It's about 7,000 square feet inside, approximately 70 by 100. Although it's a little bit irregularly shaped.
And remember, we are in Southwest Ohio, so the cost of materials for us might be different from the cost of materials where you are. So where should we start?
Well, the first thing we did was sign up for Chip Drop. So this is a service that you can get free wood chips from local arborists. We actually did pay about $20 per load there. What happens with Chip Drop is they charge $20 to the arborist, and you can opt to pay that $20. So we just felt like it was more likely we were going to get wood chips if we made it free for them. And we got about 60 yards of wood chips to start, which we knew we would need for our pathways.
Yeah, it was the first thing we did was lay the wood chips down to prevent a lot of weed growth and muddy spots in the garden, so it sort of created a nice landing pad, so to speak, before building the beds.
Yeah, you'll see we're going to build raised beds. It's definitely easier to move the wood chips in before the beds are there. So that's what we did. So total, that was $60 for those 3 big loads of wood chips.
So the next step was building our beds, and we decided to use pressure-treated 4x4 lumber.
Yeah, we really like the look of wooden beds. I know lots of times those corrugated metal beds are relatively popular, which there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, and you don't have to build them.
Right, yeah, that makes it a little easier. One thing that's really nice that we like about the wooden beds is you can sit on the edge of them and harvest and weed. So that's why we made that choice.
And it honestly acts like a ledge. So if you're harvesting stuff, you can just set everything down. It's almost like a shelf. So they're pretty practical. So now let's break down the cost of materials per bed.
Yeah, we wrote down some notes here, so we'll be referencing them. So each bed, the beds are 4 feet by 12 feet. So on the sides, and they're 4 4x4s tall. So on the sides we need 8 12-foot 4x4s. And then we got 8-foot 4x4s that we cut in half. So we only needed 4 of those per bed. The 12-foot ones, I think were about $20 each at the time. And the 8-foot ones were about $10 each. So that's about $240 per bed for the lumber.
And we used 6-inch lag screws, which are a little costly.
Yeah, they were more expensive than we thought. Each box, I can't remember how many were in a box, but each box was maybe a little less than $60. We'll just call it $60. And each bed used about half a box. So we needed about $30 in screws as well.
Per bed.
Per bed.
So that puts us at $270 per bed, and we have 12. So the total was about $3,240 for all of our beds.
It adds up when you have a lot of beds.
It adds up. It adds up when you have a lot of beds, and that's important. So once we had our beds made, we needed to fill them, and we decided to do a mixture of compost, peat moss, and vermiculite.
Yeah, so let's add up those costs. So we got compost delivered, and it was, I think, $600 delivered, and that was for all the beds. So we had 12 beds, so $50 in compost. For the peat moss, it used 4 bags of peat moss. Those were $25 each. And then the vermiculite, we used 3 bags of that, and those were $37 each. And we also, just to reduce the amount of fill we needed, we put a couple composted straw bales down in the bottom. Those are cheap, they're like $6 each, so about $12 in straw. So if we add all that up, we get about $273 per bed. There's 12 beds, so what would that total then be?
Approximately $3,276.
to fill all 12 raised
all
beds.
12 raised beds.
Yep.
So our beds are made, our beds are filled. Let's talk about the hoops for our row covers in some of our beds.
Yeah, you guys have probably seen those in our videos. We used 1/2-inch EMT conduit, 10-foot lengths there. They were pretty cheap. It's like $6 each. Each bed that has those has 4 of those. And so if you add the little attachment points, it's about $40 per bed there. We only put them on 7 of the beds, so about $210 for the permanent hoops in the 7 beds.
And now we have trellises over some of our beds as well.
Right, the reason we don't have the hoops on all the beds is we have some trellises. One of those is the tomato tower, I call it. It's basically a structure that has multiple 8-foot poles there. I calculated out the cost of that. It's 6 T-posts, some wood, and then those poles. So about $136 it costs to build that. And then we have the cattle panels.
Right.
Pretty standard, basically 4 T-posts and a cattle panel that's arched over. And so the cattle panel itself is about $24. The T-post also about $24 for the 4 T-posts, so about $48
How many
per one.
And how many do we have again?
So we have 4 of them.
Oh,
so the total, I guess, then would be $192 for the cattle panel trellises.
So what are some of the other expenses we had just that first year?
So we did the straw bale gardens. Those, we get the straw for about $6 a bale. And so I think we spent about $240 on the straw bales. I think we got about 40 bales that first year. And then we had those hardware cloth underneath.
Right.
I'd say maybe $100 or so total that we put underneath the beds to prevent, voles and things like that from
Coming
trying to
up.
dig under. But that basically is what got us through the first year, and it was a really good gardening year.
Yeah. So now we're into year 2. We added a fence and we added an orchard with 26 fruit trees. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, as far as costs go, maybe we'll talk about the orchard first. So I did 2 things with the orchard. The first is we had to buy the actual trees. There were 26 of them. Those were about $35 average each. So I guess that comes to about $910. The other thing I did is I created sort of mounded raised beds for each tree to allow for better drainage. It's not super necessary, but in clay soil, I felt like long term that would be good. And the cost for the delivery of the compost topsoil mix that I used was about $800.
Oh, and our berries. We have to add our berries.
Right, we also put the strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries in. The total cost there, it was about $600 total when you add the bare root strawberries, the blueberries that we got, and the bare root raspberries.
And of course, we put up a fence, and that was
Expensive. Yeah, it was something we splurged on. So we knew we needed a fence. We wanted something sort of rustic, so we went with a split rail fence. It's 5 feet tall, not perfectly deer proof, but luckily the deer don't seem to
haven't come
jump
in at
over it.
all. Yeah.
And I considered putting it in myself,
but
the reality was
make sense.
with a full-time job, with starting all the seeds and prepping all the rest of the garden, it just probably would never have gotten done. So we ended up hiring someone to put the fence up. I wrote down those numbers there. So the total was about $6,500. The perimeter of the garden is about 340 feet total. And so it was a little less than $20 per foot, which was a pretty good deal, I think, considering there's also the gates and everything as
it
well.
does. It includes our gates. We have a nice, entry. We actually have multiple entry points. We have a kind of a big one, and then we have a few, actually, I think 3 or 4
looking at
small
it right
others.
now.
I'm looking at it right now. I'm trying to think, how many do we have?
Yeah, I think you could have saved money on that. We could have saved money on that, but the reality was it would have been really difficult to do in the timing that we had. So we ended up hiring people for that.
Yep. So we're in year 2. We did have to spend money on more compost.
Yeah, I think we spent about $300 for another compost delivery. And then we also got the straw bales. I think we bought more straw bales that next year. I think we bought 50 of them at $6 each, so it was about $300 for the straw bales.
But we grew a lot. And then we also put in drip irrigation in the beds, so that was another.
Right. I think the total for that was about $1,200 for all the drip irrigation, and then there's a Rainbird controller to just sort of control the drip irrigation as well. Luckily, we already had the well, so we just had to connect it to the well.
So here comes the fun part. We're gonna add it all up and see the cost.
Yeah, I've been doing a running total on the video, but we don't see that. So the total cost I think we got was about $16,960.
Which seems expensive, and it is. However, remember, we put up a fence, we built the beds, we filled the beds, we prepped everything. So it was a big amount up front, but it is our hobby, and it's how we find joy and happiness.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was worth it. The costs are about evenly split between the first and the second year, because the cost of building the beds was pretty expensive, but then we also did the fence the second year. So about half the cost the first year, half the cost the second year. I mean, I think there's two ways we can look at it. One is it's pretty expensive just to grow vegetables. Or you could think of it as sort of a permanent landscaping at your home. It's a large area. We think it's beautiful. It's something that we always wanted. And if you compare it to, say, putting in a patio or just ornamental plants,
it adds up.
those things are at least as expensive if you're going to have that professionally done.
Yep. So is there anything you think we could have done to reduce the cost?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. The first would be to build your own fence. And of course, if your goal is to just have it be functional, it would be way less expensive just to go to Tractor Supply, get T-posts, and put up a fence.
Yep.
And our garden's right next to the house. We look at it through our kitchen. We can see it right there. And so we both wanted it to be functional and aesthetic. So I think that was one of the things there. And then the other thing would be to grow food in the ground rather than in raised beds. Obviously, the raised beds cost quite a lot to make and to fill. The problem with that, and in-ground gardening works really well, but it tends to lag a little bit. Meaning, we had a great first year. We had an even better second year. To amend the soil, to really get that clay soil to a point where you're growing really good vegetables, it just takes a while. And so we love working in raised beds. They're easier to maintain, they're easier to keep clean, they're easier to weed.
They're easier on anybody who might have even slight mobility issues or back problems or knee problems. I find them much more comfortable than going all the way to the ground.
Yeah, so long term, it was something we wanted to invest in, and we're happy we did.
Yeah. So how much do you think it's going to cost to maintain every year a good healthy garden, not including the cost of seeds or plants, just garden function?
That's a good question. I think it's probably going to be about $500 a year or so.
I mean, I was thinking
built most of the infrastructure at this point. Somewhere around $200 to $300 in compost and other soil amendments.
Straw bales too.
And then the straw bales will be about the same. Now, the straw bale gardening is really good early because every year you get all that compost, and that's what we top the beds off with. In theory, we might reduce the number of bales over time as the soil matures even more, but we really do like the straw bale gardens. They're not very much upfront cost, so a few $100 and you can have a really bountiful garden. But the problem is they're a recurring cost.
Yeah, so every year.
Every year you're buying new straw bales, and that can add up over the years.
But again, they are a nice height. So for people who might have a difficult time getting down on the ground, if you don't have a bed but you don't want to use the ground, straw bale is a pretty good in between.
Like an instant raised bed, and we're going to cover that a little bit more in a future video.
Yeah. Well, that about sums up how much it cost us to build our dream garden. Hopefully you found this video helpful and informative.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun building it, and we're really happy with how things have gone so far. We do want to build a greenhouse at some point. That would be the only real big extra cost that we'd have. So if you want to help us build that greenhouse, go ahead and put a thumbs up down there. If you like this type of content, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And if there's any questions that we didn't answer, let us know in the comments. We're happy to answer them.